welcome to a special edition of the Bet the Close podcast. I'm joined with the host of Bet the Close, Chris Bolello, and the owner and founder of Fantasy Football Metrics, RC Fisher. I'm Andrew DFS. We're going to be talking about Wildcard Weekend and NFL playoffs futures in general. But before we do that, Chris wants to report on the results of our picks in the preseason, the division winners, our conference winners, Super Bowl winners. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Thank you. Yes, I decided to listen to our preseason podcast where we outlined our preseason prop bets, went through every division, picked the division winner, and when I downloaded it, I realized it was 3 hours long. And so I listened to it on 2 times speed and got through. But even just right off the top, what I like to do on the podcast, for those of you who don't listen to Bet the Close, is just kind of give a post-production recap of all the best bets, just so that everybody knows here are the bets, and then you can listen to the content if you wanted to learn more about the deep dive. But the best bets were Caleb Williams under 23.5 touchdowns, and as we were discussing the different odds, it was 21.5, 22.5, and it was DraftKings that had 23.5. So wide open for everybody to go ahead and pick that off. And we were getting juice, which the juice was on the over. So we were getting either even money or plus 105 on the under touchdowns. So that was a nice one. And we had to sweat that a bit. He had 19 touchdowns with 2 games to go. He just didn't throw any in the last couple, but that was great. Jacksonville under 8.5 wins. I don't know if everybody remembers that one, but I was biggest on that one. I think we all had agreement, but I bet a decent amount on Jacksonville. I was very pleased with that result. And the Rams over 8.5 at the time. So here's the deal. We did the Rams over 8.5 in the summer. By the time we did the podcast, though, Rams over 8.5 was minus 160. So they were really pushing toward being a 9-win team. And what we said at the time was, okay, if 8.5 minus 160 is too expensive for you, look at to make the playoffs plus 112. To win the division plus 350 was what we were talking about. And at the time, we also mentioned conference 15-1, Super Bowl 30-1, but the bets were playoffs and division. So, and then we lost Latu for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and that was a big one. I had a good amount on that, but can't win them all, I guess. And then we did give Jaden Daniels for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and that's undecided, obviously, but that's a good one you want to have. So those were the props were beautiful. And then now into the picks, and between the 3 of us, there was a clear winner. Do you want to guess who won?
Among the division winners, or
we each picked a division winner, and I just based it on. I'm getting a little bit of feedback now, but based on a $100 bet. If you bet 100 on each of our picks, what would you end up with? Then we picked a conference winner and a Super Bowl winner. So obviously there's some of it that's undecided. But I don't know if you remember who you picked or how you feel like you did.
I don't. I'm just having Tennessee Titans flashbacks, so I can't. I'm thinking I probably took the Titans in that. I don't know. I'll guess that you won it.
Andrew?
Because Andrew would have been basing a lot on the Falcons winning the division.
That was only one. I mean, I know I was probably the only one backing the Falcons, but
I think we all were.
Were we all backing Falcons? I feel like no. I think Chris might have taken New Orleans RC. I think you took Tampa, if I remember correctly.
Very good memory, Andrew.
Wow.
That's exactly the way it went. RC
I set you up for that. I knew I took Tampa
RC
Bay.
got Tampa.
I just wanted you to say it.
I had New Orleans, which I don't know if you guys recall, but after week 2, I was really spiking the ball on that New Orleans pick after they blew 2 teams in a row out.
They looked so good for 2 weeks.
I was thinking, I'm taking this thing down. So after adding up all of the division bets, I actually finished last out of the 3 of us. But I will say that I was plus 80 bucks. So right. I didn't lose. I just lost to you guys. And
so we're all profitable.
We were all profitable, yeah. And my only division, I only hit 3 divisions. I had Kansas City, Detroit plus 130, and the Rams plus 350. So I don't know if you guys remember, we were unanimous on the Jets. That all went up in flames. Next was RC plus 300. And it was on what you guys just said. He had the Rams as well. We all had the Rams, by the way. Tampa Bay plus 320. and Detroit plus 130. So RC only hit 3 divisions, but he had some juicy Tampa Bay odds there, and he finished. So if you $100 on eight of RC's picks, and you ended up plus 300, and the big winner in the division bets. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 division winners out of 8 was Andrew. That's good for plus $525 on those $100 bets. And Andrew had the Rams. He had Detroit, he had Philly, he had Kansas City, and he also hit Baltimore plus 145. And you might recall, RC and I were both on Cincinnati because we were really hot on the strength of schedule difference. And the reality was Cincinnati lost to all the bottom feeder teams that we had projected. And so there was 3 things that stood out, kind of one for each of us. Andrew nailing the divisions. And by the way, when we go on to the next rounds, I'm not I'm out because I had Cincinnati winning the AFC, and they were my Super Bowl pick too. So both of you guys had Baltimore to win the AFC, Rams to win the NFC. So you're live on your bets still, and both of you guys had Baltimore as your champions. And so it was pretty interesting to listen back because the way RC was handicapping the NFC, the teams he dismissed, he basically had a package of Rams, Detroit, and Green Bay futures. So it was good. RC's, I would say, the shining bit of information that I would say I didn't act on that I wish I did was we had a decently long discussion on Denver. And they were a very big long shot to win the division, and I think RC went for it. Plus, it was like 2,000. And but to think about the idea that we could have made a Denver to make the playoffs bet, but it was an interesting in-depth conversation about Denver. And then 2 more interesting notes, and I'm done. Minnesota was 11-1 to win the division. Obviously, they didn't, but just to think back, they were a 6.5 win team, 11-1 to win the division is surprising. And then the last thing that struck me was I put out a pretty strong warning to the world about New England, Cincinnati, Week 1 survivor killer. And I didn't love to see that come to fruition. Or I guess I kind of did, not from the Cincinnati standpoint because it set the tone for their season, but well, I got to say, after that game happened, I got a lot of notes that said, people I know that listen, I should have listened to you, and even to be fair, I said they're being priced like they're an 80% chance, and I think they have a 70% chance. So it wasn't like I was making this bold call, but I was saying emphatically they will not be a survivor choice for me. So that was that. It was cool to listen back and and to see how. There was a couple things off, but a lot of things hit. So nice preseason show for us. And now, enough patting ourselves in the back. It's time to look forward and get a good wild card show. Is it super wild card?
I think after they added that third game, the third wild card team, they started calling it a super wild card weekend.
I know they did, and I heard a couple people say it this week, but all the graphics just say wild card. I wonder if the super wild card went away.
Yeah.
This is important. This is important to me. I need to know before we can move on.
By super, do you mean give back all of our gains from the season in the playoffs? Yes.
Super wild card for the bookies.
Hopefully not, but let's dive into that first game of the weekend, everybody. Chargers at Houston, Saturday, I believe 4:30 Eastern kickoff. We have Harbaugh, first-year head coach for the Chargers. Obviously, he coached with the Niners before and won a natty with with Michigan last year. But he's going into Houston to take on DeMeco Ryans and C.J. Stroud. So Houston is a 3-point home dog. Over under here is 42.5. Everybody, should we start with who our pick is against the spread on the count of 3? All right.
Want to do against the spread or
Let's
straight
do against
up
the
pick?
Spread, and then we'll do straight up. All right. So against the spread, Houston plus 3. 1, 2, 3. Houston.
Chargers.
And Chris, Chris
is muted. He's voting for. He thinks it's going to be a push.
I was waiting. I was gonna answer at about 7:30 on Saturday. Well, I would take the Chargers with the 2.5, but I think there's interesting things to talk about on both sides. This
Yeah,
is not a high conviction pick.
yeah, I think this one is one where I'm like not the most confident about. I don't think Herbert's had a playoff win yet. So I mean, they are going inside a dome, which obviously, Los Angeles isn't a cold weather team, so it does favor them in that regard. But I think that CJ Stroud here, he's been in this spot before. CJ Stroud has a playoff win. Um, I think that they could come in and, kind of come in a little bit more flat. See, the Chargers, I think, played their starters all the way through in Week 18, whereas Houston, they pulled Stroud out like after the first series. Overall, though, I think Houston fairly disappointed throughout the season. A lot more people thought they would be more dominant than what they were. They still won the division, but by and large, I don't think that Stroud looked as sharp as he did in year two versus what we saw in his rookie season. And before I pass the mic over to Chris and RC so they can defend their position on why they took the Chargers, I will say that since 2000, against the spread, just home dogs in the playoffs, they cover at close to 59% rate against the spread. So that also gives me a little more confidence, but this isn't my best bet of the weekend by any means. Chris, you want to go next?
Yeah, well, I'll say that I'm not sure really where I want to be on this game. I have thoughts on either side. I think when the line, if I'm looking about the way the line is moving, it makes me think that if you can get the 3 with Houston, that is a better bet than betting the Chargers on the road. And even when this line first came out, RC sent the note, LA, Chargers -2.5 before you had a chance to see the lines and have things settle in. And I don't know. My thought on this game is I think it actually, even though it's a tiny spread, it might land in between there. I can see the Chargers winning and not covering this game. But the reason that I was initially thinking Chargers is the huge coaching advantage. I think it is a significant coaching advantage with Harbaugh versus DeMeco Ryans. I think that significant coaching advantage flows through the entire team in terms of confidence. But there's a lot of reasons to, I guess starting on jumping around, I heard someone talk about Stroud struggled versus Harbaugh's Michigan team. So I don't know if that's a Ohio State struggling against Michigan, which they have lately, or if there's something there. But I thought it was interesting. And the Chargers, Chargers 7-2 against the spread on the road this year, so they have played well. But as soon as I heard that, I thought, well, how many times have they been a 3-point favorite on the road? Probably. I mean, I could look right now, and I will while RC's going. I'm guessing never, and I'm thinking that's probably right. I'm going to look at their road games and see if they even were a favorite once while RC's talking. So the sharp money I heard is when the 3 shows up, because it was 2.5, it went to 3. It bumped back to 2.5. The sharp money is on Houston +3, and that makes sense because I heard people saying basically, are the Chargers better than Houston? They have the Chargers rated better than Houston. They do not have them rated 4 points better than Houston. So the last thing I'll say about the Texans is a thought that I had all week, which we heard it a million times, which was the Chargers need to win because you want to play Houston. You got to avoid the Ravens. You got to avoid the Bills. All week, all everyone talked about was you got to play Houston. You got to play Houston. And I think that the Texans were hearing that. So you might get, you're going to get a max effort in the playoffs anyway. But when you get to the end of the game, sometimes you hear the guys in the post-game interview and they're like, "Oh, we heard all week. Everybody wanted us." It's just a disrespectful thing, and NFL teams respond to that.
From my side, I don't love this game for a pick. I'll take the Chargers, and why I'm with the Chargers, just basing it on watching these two teams. When I started preparing and looking at who I was going to pick in the playoffs all the way through for the brackets for various contests. I looked at like the last 9, 10 games of these teams throughout the early part of the season. And my my simplistic feel for this Chargers Texans game is the Chargers have been getting progressively better as the season has gone on. They're not great, but there's if you put it on like a chart or curve, they're on the upswing. They're getting players back healthy that they were missing. A lot of young defenders in the secondary are starting to shine through now. Um, it, it it's a team that's moving in the right direction. It's not great. It's not a tidal wave. It's not a tsunami that's coming to win a bunch of playoff games, but it's moving in the right direction. But more, what scares me is that the Texans are a team that's moving in the wrong direction. Um, One of the most sacked teams. I think one of CJ Stroud's problems has been they've been one of the most sacked teams in the NFL this season. It's a really bad offensive line. They were very reliant on Joe Mixon the first part of the season. They were winning games behind Joe Mixon. Then here in the second half, teams started realizing that and starting to attack and shut down. All of a sudden, Joe Mixon's like fantasy numbers and everything else started coming down. Um, they didn't seem to have another gear. They've lost pretty much their entire wide receiver core that's worth talking about, except for Nico Collins. But I think in their last 8 games, if you throw out Week 18 because they didn't play any of their regulars, they're 3-5 in their last 8 games coming into the playoffs. They played a weak schedule because of the flimsy AFC South. The Chargers played in a much tougher division. I had a tougher schedule to my eye. I just look at it and I'm like, Justin Herbert is better than CJ Stroud. The Chargers' offensive line isn't great, but it's better than what the Houston Texans are putting out there. Then if I look at the two defenses, to me, they're about the same. You could argue for either one. So they both have good kickers. I'm looking at it like all the advantages, including head coach, which I think Chris alluded to. I think that is maybe the biggest advantage. And I'm not a huge Jim Harbaugh guy, but he's done better with the Chargers than what D'Amico Ryans has started to do. The Texans are on the verge of unraveling. If the Texans were in any other division, especially the tougher ones, like if the Texans were in the AFC West, I think they would have finished under 500. They would have been probably a 6-win team. I just don't see when I watch Houston games, I just don't see them up to the task. What scares me about getting too excited about the Chargers is that every 4 or 5 weeks, the Texans would play some great game. Like their defense would shut down the opposing offense, and they gave the Lions a scare. And I think did they beat the Bills this season or close? So
They were close. I don't remember if they won.
They would be trailing Jacksonville. They would be trailing the Colts and have to make some type of comeback. The Titans kicked their ass in the middle of the season. And just when you thought, man, Houston stinks, then they turn around and have a great game against Detroit, or give Detroit a game, or Buffalo a game. So, but anytime I even saw that, I just didn't see a team that was efficient and clicking. It was always so disjointed. Where last year it was so exciting to watch Houston. I thought, man, what a great job by D'Amico Ryans. Everything is clicking for them. CJ Stroud looks great. And then this year, it's all come apart. So I'm with the momentum. I'm with the Chargers on this one. But I'm not betting it.
It seems like they play up and down to their competition, right? So like they show out against Detroit, Buffalo, but then like you said, against Indy or Jacksonville, they're struggling to hang in the game. In the last like portion of this particular game, I wanted to ask you guys, are there any props or advantage, like any key mismatches you see on either side? Because I think the Chargers like run D throughout the season was pretty solid. They had, I think there were a couple games where they kind of veered away from that, and then for Houston D, I think they were giving up a lot of at least fantasy points to wide receivers. So I'm curious if you guys are looking at any like unders on the running backs for Houston for Joe Mixon, I guess, and then maybe over on like McConkey or Quentin Johnston here.
Chris, you're on mute.
Well, I guess my reaction to that is I'm not sure I want over on Chargers receivers if I think they're going to win. So that's, I guess, where I. But what I really like for props, and this is more a question that I think could lead to somewhere good, is the biggest mismatch in the game. I think is the Chargers' defensive line against Houston's offensive line. So that's a good mismatch to have. So I think the sack props or tackle and sack props are so much fun. But in this case, where it's just a turnstile, you can get to Stroud. And if the game state goes the way at least RC and I's, Andrew, if Houston's going to win, they still could get sacks. But if the Chargers are going to win, well, we got them throwing at the end, and maybe we get some that way as well. So I kind of feel like two things: look for sack props for the Chargers guys, and potentially Stroud rushing yards. Are my things I think about for that. And by the way, Houston did beat Buffalo 23-20 in Week 5, and they did only lose by 3 to Detroit. So you're right. But then also, kind of the most recent was the game most people watched on Christmas, where they just got manhandled by the Ravens. So that was that's the game I think is in everybody's mind, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, had they have been more competitive in that game, maybe this line would have been closer to pick 'em.
And as you're working their way through the season, through that Buffalo win, through the Detroit close call, even the Chiefs, which was kind of close, but it really wasn't. I think they scored late to make it closer than it was, if I remember correctly. As they progress through the season, they just keep losing more and more key players. They lost Stephon Diggs, then they lost Tank Dell. Then it's like the wheels are slowly coming off. CJ Stroud, his last 6 games, let's make it last 8 games. Here's the amount of times he's been sacked in the last 8 games, not including his part-time play in Week 18. Ravens sacked him 5 times, Chiefs 2, Miami 4, Jacksonville 2, Tennessee 4, Dallas 1, Detroit 4, Jets 8. He gets sacked 4 or more times in a game, which is a lot on the regular here in the second half of the season. So their offensive line isn't even getting any better. They've had injuries on the offensive line all season, and it's not good anyway. I can't get behind Houston, and that's pushing me towards the Chargers that I don't really love. So I did look at the sack props. All that to say, I did look at the sack props for this, and I just couldn't get excited about what DraftKings had listed because they have Bosa, Tuliapo, and
James,
somebody else on the defensive line, and they were at nice odds, and I was considering them, but then I looked to see what those guys were doing recently, and the Chargers aren't sacking anybody. Bosa's a joke. I mean, he's probably getting $10 million per sack the way that he's going in his career. So I'm sure one of them is going to get their sack because the Chargers are probably going to sack Stroud 3, 4, 5 times. I just couldn't pull the trigger. Nobody jumped out to me. If I was going to bet one, I think it would be Thule over Bosa, but this might be where Bosa actually shows up for a game, that it's a playoff game.
Yeah. I'm decently sure.
Chris.
Well, what I'm looking at here is just, it seems like it's a bit off. I'm looking at FanDuel and then toggling back and forth to offshore. Joey Bosa at FanDuel minus 146. But then offshore,
Plus 220 on
Plus 225.
DraftKings.
Yeah, plus 225 offshore. Khalil Mack's not even listed, but even Tua Palatu plus 150 offshore, plus 116 at FanDuel. Usually you don't see.
And you guys know I have had a pretty good run of picking the players that are going to get a sack in a given week, and I just the kind of formula and feel that I use, I just couldn't get behind Mac or Thule or Bosa. I know one of them's going to get a sack, but I like to, if I'm going to bet on a sack, I want to know that in my mind it's a lock, like with the Nick Benito run and everything else. I look at Mac and Bosa and their names from the past. If this was 4 years ago, maybe, but you look at their recent history, like Khalil Mack has like 1.5 sacks in the last half of the season. Bosa has like 2. Thule was hot for a bit, and then he's just totally dried up. So, yes, one of them or more is going to get a sack. I just don't know who it's going to be. Not enough conviction. And to Andrew's point, the defenses have so turned on Joe Mixon and brought him down that I'm scared. I know that Houston's going to try to hide behind him for an offense, but they're not going to be able to. I think that Mixon over 20 yards receiving has some chops because Mixon will be on the field the entire time. They won't be messing around with bringing in Ogunbowale. And earlier in the season, Mixon was crushing in the passing game. I think he'll get that 20 yards, especially if the Texans are playing from behind and the Chargers are not great defending the pass against the running backs. I want to take J.K. Dobbins over on rushing because I know that's the way the Chargers are going to want to beat them. But I'm a little gun shy on J.K. Dobbins. I've only bet one prop thing in this game, and I'm waiting for more props to come. It's Darius Davis anytime touchdown plus 750. He had 2 touchdowns. He had a touchdown in week 16, week 17, and then they didn't do much. They crushed whoever it was they were playing, and they didn't play a normal game week 18. Josh Palmer's going to be out. Darius Davis is their second best wide receiver in my mind, to be behind Ladd McConkey. And I see the early stages breakout of Darius Davis with Justin Herbert, trusting him. So I think this is like a Kevontae Turpin type thing, or early Marvin Mims. Not that Darius Davis is going to go full scale Marvin Mims, but I think we're in the early stages of that happening to where we're going to get. But and I like and I hate they haven't even listed him. They don't even acknowledge him on DraftKings or FanDuel as for receptions or yards. Like I know if they put that up by game time, which they might, it'll be like 10, 11, 12 yards. I will crush that thing if that pops up. But in lieu of that, right now, it's plus 750 for a touchdown on Darius Davis. And the guy has, again, a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 games, the one game being week 18 where they weren't really playing they crushed, Vegas. And didn't have to pull out all the stops to win. So I can forgive him for not scoring a touchdown that week.
Yeah. RC, my question to you is going to be how you felt about Davis relative to Marvin Mims, because you kind of saw it coming. You called him out early. And then obviously these past 2 weeks, he scored 2 touchdowns in week 17 and week 18. So it sounds like with Davis, you're a little less confident compared to Mims.
I put him in the Kevontae Turpin category when we were starting to hit that, when we were getting the over 9 yards, the over 11 yards, and over 4 yards rushing and all that kind of stuff. If I could get those numbers with Davis, that's what I would hop on. at knowing that I can get frustrated. Like there was weeks we were winning most of those Turpin bets, but then there'd be a week where they didn't use Turpin, and I would be like, "What the hell are they doing?" That's kind of where Darius Davis is at.
Yeah.
Wanting to
Mims
break
was
out,
there
it's
too.
sitting right there for the Chargers to use, but it's just like Mims, just like Turpin. It takes them 4 weeks too long to finally get in the groove with these guys. Davis is in the very early stages of a breakout. Part of it
Yeah.
being that the Chargers wide receiver group is terrible outside of Lad McConkey.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, we'll see how this exactly goes down, but you both brought up a really good point about Houston losing to Baltimore and that being on the minds of bettors. What I want to remind the audience though about that specific game is for the first time this year, four teams in the NFL had to play 3 games in 10 days. And one of those teams were the Texans, and obviously the team they faced off in that span, 3 games in 10 days, were the Ravens. The Ravens were on the road. They're a more established veteran team. So it didn't really shock me that they kind of got the best of Houston in that regard, given that they're on the road. You know, Lamar's been in those spots before. CJ Stroud's younger, and I feel like that short amount of rest really got to Houston. So I think the market might be overreact. I don't think that they should be a +3 dog again. I feel like this should be closer to a pick 'em, but we'll see what happens at the end of the day. Now, speaking of other teams that played 3 games in 10 days, our next matchup, Saturday night, we have Pittsburgh going into Baltimore for an AFC North divisional matchup, wild card weekend. Winner, the loser goes home. Baltimore is a 9.5 point favorite. The over under is 43.5. And this is the tale of two teams that are on two different trajectories. Pittsburgh has lost 4 in a row. Baltimore has won 4 in a row. And in those 4 games, guys, Baltimore has won by more than 17 points in each one. They are crushing opponents. One of those wins came against Houston. Now, for me, I'm just seeing this as, Pittsburgh is sort of like on the downtrend, but they had sort of like a closer game in week 18. They were fighting for it against Cincy, so that was sort of like a playoff feel, whereas Baltimore sort of coasted by Cleveland. So before we kick everything off, guys, let's pick the winner against the spread. Again, Baltimore -9.5 is the line. So on the count of 3, we'll give our picks. 1, 2, 3.
Ravens.
Pittsburgh. And Chris is silent again.
Chris is going for a push.
I was betting sacks on that other game. I'm going to go with Baltimore.
Baltimore. Okay, so I guess wow, you got I feel like I'm the lone wolf on so far. So I'll go first with Pittsburgh. Again, I think that with Baltimore, they've just been, they haven't really played in any close games in over a month. And this Pittsburgh team, they're spiraling, but I think here in this spot, they do show up and give Baltimore a run for this game. Baltimore, was RC's Super Bowl pick. They were my Super Bowl pick to represent the AFC. We were very excited when they got Henry. They have the offensive line. They have a mobile QB to sort of get their offense clicking. But this is, at the end of the day, a divisional showdown. So I'm going to take the points here. 9.5 is too much for me. I think that under 7, I might have taken Baltimore, but 9.5 just feels too rich. So I'll pause there. I'll flip it back to Chris or RC for them to defend their position on Baltimore -9.5.
Good, Chris. Well, all the things you said about Baltimore are the things I like about them. There was a time, and RC could probably put his finger on when it happened watching all these games, but this defense wasn't what early in the year, the Baltimore defense, isn't what it's been lately. They've really come on and started playing well. They have the defensive coordinator switch, and now they're playing awesome. So I really feel like uh, you got one team that's going in strongly in one direction, and it was a team who had a disappointing playoff loss that they really felt like they could have made and even won the Super Bowl last year. So uh, uh, they added Henry, and it's like everything's building toward now we're in the playoff. The fact that it's a familiar opponent, I don't think it favors either team. And these wild card favorites that are 8 or above, they were 10-1 against the spread, and you had Buffalo beat Pittsburgh last year to go to 11-1 against the spread in recent years. So I don't really feel like I get the idea of taking points, but I don't think. I mean, listen, Pittsburgh could cover it, but I don't think they're in good form. And these wild card games, really playoff games in general, but particularly wild card, you don't see backdoor covers. So I kind of feel like that's off the table. If Baltimore's up by 2 touchdowns, if they're up by 10, they're going to win by 10, most likely, if history is our guide. So when you take the backdoor cover away, I think you've got one team who I looked at the teams this year, kind of just kind of a numerical profile where I'm just trying to build something that looks like the way people look at NCAA teams and filter and screen them to say there's really 12 teams based on history. Does this team look like past winners? And the Ravens haven't recently, and they do this year. So that put me higher on the Ravens, and Pittsburgh has the profile of a team that exits with a whimper. So that's my really everything comes together and says, okay, I'm going to circle Baltimore as the pick. I haven't bet them yet, but if it stays under 10, I would be tempted to.
I might as well, but to your point about the Ravens defense turning, it was Andrew who reminded me in season why that was. So I will let Andrew give out the reason and when the Ravens made a turn on defense.
Yeah, it came, I believe, after the second Joe Burrow game where he dropped another, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jamar Chase went crazy. The Ravens defense, really, their secondary struggled in the beginning part of the season. And what they did is they went back and they brought Dean Pease, who used to work with Belichick in New England. I believe he was also the DC for Baltimore for quite some time, but he's a guru, a defensive secondary. Like, he really knows how to shape up that secondary. I think he moved. I think the way they were using Kyle Hamilton before was they were kind of playing him almost like a pseudo linebacker. RC could probably talk about that way better than I could, but now they're kind of letting him play his more natural safety position, which is helping out the Ravens secondary. So they've been much more efficient there. And on the flip side, before I give it back to RC for him to discuss why he likes the Ravens, Pittsburgh's secondary has been very leaky these past couple of weeks. I think there have been injuries there. RC, are they getting healthier there? Is there an underlying issue?
It's a Joey Porter has been a letdown this year. And then the other side was already weak, but then the Joey Porter shutdown factor that we saw last year is really not coming as much to fruition this year for whatever reason. He may be secretly hurt. He's been banged up the last week or two, but there was problems before that. And to me, I think the problem with the Steelers is the Arthur Smith has been figured out. There was a stretch where the Steelers offense was kind of rolling, and you're like, wow, Arthur Smith, Mike Tomlin, we got some magic going on here. It's all fallen apart the last half of the season. Last 4 games, they haven't scored more than 17 points in a game. 7 out of their last 9 games, they've been under 20 points. In the same stretch, the Ravens have been over 30, 7 of their last 9 games, if I remember correctly. And 4 in a row, they've scored over 30. So just recent history says the Ravens are going to score 30 plus, and the Steelers aren't going to be able to get over 20. And then you look back, and the last time they played in Week 16, it was 34-17. That's probably going to be the score again. That's where the Ravens always end up, and that's about as high as the Steelers can get now. So the offense to me is starting to fall apart for Pittsburgh. They still waste too much time with Najee Harris. George Pickens been all over the place. He was hurt. That didn't help the situation, but then he came back and was a disaster. It's just the Steelers can't be expected to go in and knock off the Ravens with a lot of throwing to Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller. So credit Arthur Smith for this upcoming double-digit loss. The new Jets head coach, apparently.
That would be incredible if the Jets. Well, I mean, the Jets, that's not the most attractive job in the world, so they kind of need a puppet head coach. Arthur Smith would fit in perfectly in that regard. But what I wanted to ask you guys about was potential mismatches in this game. Is there a player here for props that sticks out to you? I think Zay Flowers, for example, might not be playing in this game. Do we like Bateman? Do we like Likely? And then on the flip side, for Pittsburgh, it sounds like we're both of you guys are low on the Pittsburgh offense. So I don't know if there are maybe unders you guys want to see. So anything stick out to you, Chris and RC, for props?
There are two props here. One I really like. The other, I just have a hunch, and maybe you guys are going to have the same hunch. I'm going to play the George Pickens over because that last week with him dropping all those passes, taking all the heat, you know he's going to come back and get targets and likely make the catches. He's all they've got. If the Steelers were to pull this thing off, it's going to be because Pickens got 100+ yards receiving and just overcame the Ravens defense, as Pickens is wont to do from time to time. So if the Ravens start running away with this, there's going to be a lot of throwing, and there's going to be a lot of throwing of Russell Wilson to Pickens. I'm assuming he'll catch them this week. He's caught them most all season. But the one that I think is almost a guarantee in this one is Isaiah Likely with the over. He's had his best games of the season against the Steelers both times, and now Zay Flowers is out. It's just a recipe for going 2 tight end sets, Likely as a quasi wide receiver tight end. He beat this number the last time they matched up. We bet it against the Steelers. I think with Zay Flowers out now, it's going to be even more imperative that it's more of a sure thing that he's going to get that over of like 26.5. I got it at 24.5 when it first came out. It's now up to 26.5.
FanDuel's 27.5. That's my problem with Likely. Likely to score a touchdown, likely to hit his receiving yards, and he very well could do it. Just it's a race. It's a race to the number. Like you said, 24.5, 26.5, 27.5. Where does it end? Probably 30. Probably all the way to 30. So it just really depends when you get it for how good of a bet it is. But I did hear this week that the Ravens are bad against tight ends. I'm sorry, the Steelers are bad against tight ends.
Yep.
So obviously that's a check for Andrews and Likely. And my thought, and I know they're going to try to get, I certainly could see them getting some rushing touchdowns, but I heard people say Likely and Andrews, playing both for a touchdown because they're both plus odds. And that's kind of what knocked me off of it, is if you hear it, it's kind of out there. So I really think this is going to depend on, I don't want to bet something that's said so many times, and it's not the yardage that you mentioned, RC, it was the touchdowns. But I just think that this is going to be, as far as getting a good bet in, it's going to be a race against the clock. When you see those numbers climb, your odds are obviously getting worse and worse with every yard that it ticks up. I really like the bets, like you just said on the Chargers game, that we have that others don't. That's really where I'd rather double down on that bet than jump in on something everybody's trying to pile in on. Just my instinct. I'm not saying it's going to lose.
It's your contrarian mindset, man. You want to go against the grain.
Well,
it happens to me too. Sometimes it's an obvious thing. Like Pittsburgh sucks against tight ends, but everybody knows that stat. The only part here that is a little more challenging is that it's not one tight end that you have to sort of keep an eye on. It's two. If it was just likely, I think this is money in the bank. But yeah, that part gives me a little concern. But on the flip side, not only are they bad against tight end, their number one wide receiver is probably out. So I mean, that gives me a lot of comfort too.
And they have purposely switched tactics because typically Likely is not really a big part of the offense. He'll get his 1, 2, 3 targets and be a disappointment after that opening game against Kansas City, where he was the fantasy player of the year for a week. They typically don't really go to him, and his numbers aren't great. But then against the Steelers, that's where he starts seeing more targets, and they use him. I'm looking through his season, and the 3 games where he got the most targets and got touchdowns in these same games is a collection of the worst defenses against the tight end from this season. Kansas City, Pittsburgh, and the Eagles in the second half of the season were starting to struggle with the tight end, shutting down everything else, but struggling against the tight end. That's where Likely has had his better games. They start going to 2 tight end sets more, plays more snaps during those. So the touchdown, who knows? But I think the yardage is going to be, with Zay Flowers out especially, I think the yards are, we could have that by the end of the first quarter.
Well, I have one that I'm interested in. RC, you won't love it. It's on FanDuel. But I think when you have a team that is, a big underdog and, potentially throwing a lot, I like Russell Wilson over his rushing yards. On FanDuel, it's 14.5. On DraftKings, it's 15.5. And if you look at his early season, he was rushing for 3 yards, 1 yard, 3 yards. And in the last, he's been over, he's been in, really the last 5 games when you see the team really turn to a losing streak. I mean, I go back from week 18 and just go back 16, 55, 27, 13, 17. And the 27 was at Baltimore. So I think you get a little bit of a boost because it's playoffs. It's kind of, it's everything on the line now or never. And so I think that's I think it's a fair number for, it's maybe his, if you look at his whole season, maybe it might look a tick high, but if you look at the last 5 weeks, I think it looks a bit low.
Yeah, that 15.5 on DraftKings. Would you say it was on FanDuel for?
14.5.
14.5, 15.5 on DraftKings. He would have hit that 4 out of the last 5 weeks. Yeah, I'd kind of written him off because he wasn't running hardly at all.
Yeah, I mean, I
think I just kind of put him out of my mind. But you're
higher
right
the leverage. I think the higher leverage is when you get the quarterbacks running, and I could see this is obviously pull out all the stops. And if they are losing, like the line suggests that would be the game state, you just get a lot more dropbacks. So a bit better chance for him. I mean, he could, you could definitely see that happening in one rush.
Yep.
Okay.
I like it.
I think we're ready.
I know we're going to move on, but Andrew, I just want to say one thing to correct something I said on the last game, if I could. I was talking about the Chargers and have they been favorites when they were on the road? And I just took a quick peek, and I just want to share that they actually been a favorite a decent amount of time. They were 4.5 at Carolina, and they blew them out. They were favored at Denver, and they won. They were favored at Arizona, and they lost by 2.
But they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
They got screwed.
Were they favorites against New England in like 3 weeks ago or something?
Yeah, they were favored a lot on the road. These are only road games at Cleveland. favored by 1.5. They won by 17. At Atlanta, they were favored by 1. They won by 4. I can't believe how much they were favored on the road. And yes, Andrew, they were favored at New England by 5.5, and they bombed them. And I guess, last week of the season, you don't count that much, but they were favored against Vegas last week by 6.5, and they won by 14. So the Chargers actually, I did not expect that, which is why I felt the need to cut in and share it. They've been favored a lot on the road this year, and that's the knock against the Chargers too, is that they had an easy schedule. In fact, the strength of schedule for playoff teams is the lowest for the Chargers. But that changes my thought on them a decent amount, which is why I felt compelled to share it. That they've been in this role tons of times.
No, I think that's definitely a good point. Something to keep in mind, especially if you're backing the Chargers, that should give you some comfort that they have been covering as favorites. I don't know if that's enough for me to come off the Houston +3, but let's shift gears. Let's go to the.
We lost you there, Andrew.
Sorry, I was on mute the entire time.
No, it happened in mid-sentence.
A little bit of the time.
Like you hit something.
Oh, that's awesome.
Accident.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just dive into the next game. Denver at Buffalo Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, wherever you may be located. So we have Buffalo -9.5. The Broncos under Sean Payton, their first season were pretty disappointing, but then they go ahead, draft Bo Nix, and all of a sudden that franchise has life. They have a pulse again, and they unfortunately seem like they drew a pretty tough matchup here against Buffalo. Again, the line is -9.5. Over unders 46.5, and I think it's going to be about 24 degrees, so it's going to be cold. There's some chance of snow. So before we break the game down, let's give out our picks on the count of 3. Again, Buffalo -9.5. 1, 2, 3. Buffalo.
I'm just gonna do the silent treatment like Chris.
Okay.
Because I don't want to be on the record picking this game, but I'm gonna pick the Broncos for our purposes here, but I would never bet it. But I almost have to recuse myself because I think I'm wanting Denver to so win this game that I'm gonna find a reason to, and I'm gonna be rooting for it. So I'm going to pick it, but I would never bet it because Buffalo at home is so strong.
Yeah, I would.
What do you think?
For our purposes, I'm going to bet Buffalo, and it's one of these situations where when I'm looking at this game, I think, I'd love to see the Broncos, put up a fight, stay within the number. That'd be fun viewing. But you have the trend of these 8+ favorites do very well in the wild card round. So that's one thing. And then, as I was saying before, when you look at the profiles of the teams, just take the team away and look at a couple of markers that I like to focus on. Denver's just so ripe for an ATS loss in the first round of the playoffs that doesn't allow me to go with my heart just wanting to see a close game, not necessarily wanting to see anything out of Denver. This is the first game now that we have a rookie quarterback against a quarterback that's made, playoff starts. So all those reasons put me on Buffalo. But as RC said, not betting it, but very interested to see if we can dig and find a prop that I will bet because I'd like something to cheer for in every game.
And I would only say this to try to cheer on, to defend Denver. At their peak, Denver probably had the best defense I've seen in the NFL around mid-season. And if you're going to bring a top defense to the playoffs, and Buffalo is not a top defense anymore, Denver is the defense in this game. They lost their way a little bit in the second half when they lost their number 2 corner. Everything started to leak for Denver, but now they've got him back the last couple weeks and things have gone better. You bring this defense with an offense that's really starting to click, 8.5 points is a lot. If you gave Denver 8.5 points in every game this season, they'd have been 16-1 against the spread. All their losses are, with the exception of getting blown out by Baltimore, all their losses are one-score losses, overtime losses, late game losses. They had the lead and then gave it up late. I don't know that Denver can be blown out. If there's somebody that's going to blow them out, it would be Buffalo at home. But I don't think Buffalo's got that good of a defense. And if you can get into a shootout with Buffalo, as Detroit and the Rams showed, you can get into a shootout with them. And I think Bo Nix can get into a shootout and have the better defense. So, yes, it'll be a shootout, but one of them has the better defense. Obviously, Josh Allen is better than Bo Nix at this stage of their career, but Denver can offset that some with their defense. So I'm more rooting for it to happen. I can kind of see where it could happen, but I would never bet it. Buffalo's too strong at home in the winter.
Yeah, that's the thing that sticks out to me. I know Denver's a cold weather team, but Bo Nix, I mean, played at Auburn and then played at Oregon, so it's not like he's accustomed to playing in the snow or in these kinds of frigid temperatures. I don't think he'll come out flat, but I think that it will probably shock him in the beginning, especially seeing that crowd noise, that playoff atmosphere it gets to you as a rookie QB. One thing that I want to throw out about Denver defense, RC's absolutely right. Especially in the middle of the season, they look great. And when they play mediocre to average QBs, they look unstoppable. But then they have performances like against Baltimore where, they let 41 points go on the board. They played the Chargers late in the season. They let 34 points go on the board. They played Cincinnati in that crazy overtime game, and they let Cincy score 30 points. So the thing is, I think with Denver is when they play a formidable QB, a higher end QB, they tend to struggle. And I think that happens here. Buffalo, in the past 11 games, 9 of them, they scored 30 plus points. I think that they're going to probably score that amount on this Denver defense, especially in the snow. And, I know MVP is a regular season award, but guys, if Josh Allen gets knocked out here by a rookie QB, I don't know how voters could, discount that. I don't know if the votes are already in.
It's too late. Yeah, they vote before these
late.
Games. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just hard to envision Allen actually losing this game. But I know we're just talking about covering. I think we're all on board that Buffalo's going to take this game straight up. RC, I don't know if you think that Denver's going to win, but yeah,
well, let me propose this. A little contest, $1 million to the winner if you get this right. If I told you from the future, one of these two teams is going to win their playoff game this week. $1 million if you guess it right. Pittsburgh or over the Ravens, or Denver over the Bills. Who would you take for the $1 million? And one of them's going to be right. So which one was it?
You're gonna think I'm crazy. I know I took Pittsburgh plus 9.5 there, but that's more that I'm confident that the Ravens are gonna win within 10. I think that they will control that game. It'll probably be lower scoring and just grind them out. I'm very confident that it's gonna end in that regard. But if one of them ends up winning, I can't see it being Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith, Pittsburgh. It has to be that Bo Nix just went crazy here. So I would pick Denver in that weird scenario.
That Bo Nix went crazy / I think also, if it were to happen, it's because the Denver defense rose up and gave Josh Allen a hard time on top of Bo Nix would have to go off.
Or my favorite prop guy goes off, and
your favorite prop guy.
My favorite prop guy for this game.
Yeah.
That I haven't disclosed yet. So I think that, and I was just listening again to our preseason preview, and part of the love for Denver was the defense, as you saw them in the preseason RC, but it was the rebuilt offensive line and the fact that this team can run the ball. And Buffalo and their interior defense, that's the weakness of this Buffalo scheme and the way the team is currently constituted. It's running up the middle, power running up the middle. And I'm looking at Audric Estime, and his yards on FanDuel are 23.5, and on DraftKings it's 22.5. Now you look at his yards this year, he's popped over that about half the time, but the last 3 games, his yardage going backwards, 18, 17, 16, 34, 24, and 48. But the bigger number that I think is more important to me than that is if you look at his carries on the year, they're 5, 6, 1, 2. In the last 3 weeks, going 18, 17, 16, back 12, 9, 9. So he's getting the ball. And if you're going to give me 9 carries and ask the guy to get 23 yards against, the risk is, does Buffalo get up 14-0 and they don't want to run anymore? But part of the formula in my mind for that upset to happen is Denver runs the ball a lot and plays defense and gets some, good performance out of Knicks, obviously. But this is the playoffs. The running the ball is so much more important than it is relative to what it was the rest of the season. I mean, you look at all the reasons the Vikings lost to Detroit. There's a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is you should never be one of 10 in the red zone throwing the ball. You should be running the ball, and they couldn't. So that's big. So I think the idea that you've got a Denver team that can run the ball, good offensive line with power. I mean, and I think you have a coaching advantage here too, which you don't have in the other game. So that's why I would if I had to take that bet for the million, I'd go for Denver, because Buffalo and Baltimore, I think, are equally susceptible to a slip up. I think maybe it might, it might be the best Baltimore team yet, but you still have the ghosts of playoff failures past. And you kind of have a little bit of that with Buffalo too. A lot of bit of that with Buffalo.
May I throw a little bit of cold water on Estime?
Nope.
To try let's save you some money, unless you already bet it.
Let's move on to the next game. I already bet it.
Okay.
I bet it before I started talking. Okay, no, please. I'm interested.
RC, why? Is it because Peyton likes to use all 4 of his running backs?
The rise of Estime the last 3 weeks in his carries. 3 weeks ago, it was because Jaleel McLaughlin was out. No accounting for, I don't remember what happened in the Cincinnati game, but in the Kansas City game, when they get up big, Estime usually is like the closer. When they're up big, then he'll get we're gonna, run this clock out. We're gonna control this game. So I don't think there's a real turn to Estime. So I would give caution on that. And this being a playoff game, and this being a game where the Broncos are going to have to be at their most clever, I think they would use Javonte Williams more, because when Javonte Williams is on the field, not only can he run it like Estime, and he's in the game usually way before Estime is, but when Javonte Williams is on the field, he's getting about as many passes as he is getting carries. You don't know what Denver's going to do on the play when Javonte's in the backfield, and you really don't know what they're going to do when Jaleel's in the backfield. When Estime's in the backfield, you know exactly what's going to happen. And you're sure as hell not going to worry about him flaring out for the passing game. So it allows them to play the passing game differently if they do try to pass it. So I'm wary of Estime here, on top of the fact that they like to rotate the running backs, but the running back rotation is usually Jaleel as the lead, but Javonte right in there, Javonte the third down back, and Estime when they're trying to run the clock, when they're trying to protect something, when they're trying to maybe throw some punches at the defense to see if it works. So it's not impossible. I would not say that it's crazy talk, but I think there's a lot of factors to the recent rise of Estimate. I don't see when I'm watching the game, I don't see them like secretly trying to push like Tampa Bay for several weeks. You could see the Bucky Irving thing, like they were trying to force that down opponents' throats to prove that they were right about Bucky Irving, and they ultimately were. Then you started seeing way more Bucky Irving, and Rashad White started to disappear. That's not what's happening in Denver with Estime. It's like he's nowhere to be found, and then all of a sudden he's in for a series, and then he's nowhere to be found, and then if they're winning or losing bad at the end of the game, then he's in. So I don't see it coming on yet with Estime.
Any other guys that both of you are kind of locked in on player prop wise? I know RC, you've been riding Marvin Mims for the past.
I bet the second it opened up, I bet the majority of my week's bets on Mims. I'm just going to keep riding that train because they now have flipped over to the point, like with Darius Davis, they're just starting to see there's something there. And it started with Mims that way about 6 weeks ago. He started to get a little bit more touches, but they weren't really giving into it. He was coming in and out of the game too much. And if he didn't hit with one of his touches right away, he was out of the game and wouldn't be in for several more snaps. Now we're getting to the point where they're like, I think they finally figured out 2 games ago in the second half when he had those 2 touchdowns and the great catch in the end zone when he jumped up over the top of 2 defenders and caught that touchdown that tied the game at the time. That second half was when I think they finally figured out what they had, because leading up to that in the first half, like Mims was growing and going, and then I bet all those props again in week 17 against Cincinnati, and It's like Mims had he had 1 catch until the final minute of halftime. Then they got him, I think the very last play, like a throwaway play, they threw him a little screen pass. So as good as he has been up until halftime of a very important game against the Bengals, if they would have won that game, they would have, week 18 wouldn't have mattered. They only got Mims the ball twice, and one of them was not very impressive. Then he came out and started making plays and forced, then all of a sudden Mims was in on every snap. They were trying to get him the ball. Last week, Mims was in a lot. They tried to get him the ball. He scored 2 touchdowns. They had a blowout, so they pulled him out. I think in a game against Buffalo that they're not going to blow out the Buffalo Bills, I think this is the week that you see Marvin Mims get like 10 touches, and that they try to hide behind him. They try to ride him as the X factor to win this game, whether it'll work or not. To me, that's a third option. Like Nix goes nuts. The Denver defense is really strong, has a really strong showing, but that it'd be Mims that is uncoverable because he's lining up all over the place and getting the ball in different ways. I think Sutton will get shut down by Benford. Mims, they'll try to probably they'll put Teron Johnson, who's really good, probably on Vele as the slot, but then Mims just kind of goes all over the place. They play him in the short game. If defenses come up on him when he plays the short game, we've seen in the last couple of weeks, he'll beat them deep. He is the Tyreek Hill in development, early stages right now. He's not as good as Tyreek Hill was, but we're in that stage of he's just a pure weapon. He's a walking touchdown waiting to happen. It's just Denver would not give into it. Sean Payton would not give into it, but he has the last 2 quarters, the last 2 halves that Denver has played, the second half of week 17 and the first half of the Kansas City blowout is when Mims is really played. And in that span, if you connected those 2 halves for a full game, he's 13 catches on 13 targets and 4 touchdowns. So I think all the Mims stuff is in play. I laddered it up all the way up to 90 plus. I don't know if he gets there. I mean, we could very well be doing this show next week and going, how the hell did Marvin Mims get 2 touches in a playoff game? But I think we're finally beyond that now. I think Sean Payton realizes this is his only hope if he's going to pull this upset off. There's
It's
no
sort of
way.
the X factor of their offense, and it's crazy that they like the kid hasn't even touched 50% of the snap counts, and he's still going crazy. So if they actually roll him out, which I think they would have done against Casey if Casey pushed him a little bit, but they just blew him out, so they pulled him out.
He'd open up everything. He's like Derrick Henry in a weird way. If the Ravens would just leave Derrick Henry on the field in all types of situations, the defense is at such a disadvantage because they don't know what's coming, but they kind of want to cheat up on Derrick Henry. It opens up the whole offense. If Lamar Jackson wins the MVP, he should just turn around and hand it to Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry has given him the MVP this season because
His
defenses
stats
are so
crazy.
focused on Henry that it opens up everything else. If they just put Marvin Mims on the field 80% of the time, there'd be so much focus on him, it would open up Sutton and Vele and the running game that's not very good and all that. But instead, they screw around and kind of put him in and out of spots. When opponents see Derrick Henry is in, they know it's probably going to be a run. When the Ravens have struggled, it's when they've gotten too cute and pulled Derrick Henry out of the game too much and put Justice Hill in too much because it's third down or second down and long. When Derrick Henry's a greater weapon in the pass game than Justice Hill is. Denver does the same thing with Marvin Mims and telegraphs what they're going to do, just like with Estime's a telegraph. Mims has been a telegraph. They can change that up this week by playing Mims a full game, which is what I think they would have done week 18, but there was such a blowout, they just pulled. There's no reason to keep going and risk, Mims would have gotten hurt. Line
or
should be
don't show your hand,
minus
right?
15.
They probably have more plays for Mims that they didn't want to tip their hand before the playoffs.
And are probably putting him more in this week. If Denver wins this game, there's no way that Mims is going to have a stat line of 2 catches for 17 yards and 1 run that went for -1, so they never did it again.
And even if they don't, RC, if they get blown out, they're probably, trying to leverage him as much as they could as sort of like their last breath.
Yep. They're going to win with him heavy or they're going to lose with him heavy.
Yeah. Chris, any closing thoughts on Denver Buffalo before we move on to the next game?
Well, I think it's challenging when you're trying to project the game plan, and I think that's the differences in the two thoughts. I think if you're going with, it's an older rookie on the age spectrum, but it's still a rookie quarterback, and you're going into Buffalo in a playoff game. At some point in time, I think they open it up, but I would be surprised if it was throw the ball all over the field with Bo Nix in the cold in Buffalo. I think the confidence I have in the Mims bet is you get him in the normal course of the offense, or the line suggests that you'll be behind and you'll be throwing the ball. But I still think, a coach like Sean Payton, when you think about his greatest offenses he's ever had, it was like a 2 running back. The running game was a big part of it. So it could be that, estimate, it was funny, RC, we were talking about the 3 running backs, and I'm blanking on his name, the Denver running back that we loved. Williams. Williams wasn't even listed. He's not listed yet. I'm not sure why, what they're doing there, but McLaughlin is listed and Estime is listed, but not Javonte.
For rushing?
Yeah, I didn't see him. I might have missed it.
Yeah, I thought I saw him just because I was looking to see what the difference was between the 3 guys, and I thought it was all a cluster pretty close.
I see McLaughlin is
he's off the board now.
33.5. Estimates 22.5, and I don't see him. So
yeah, I don't know. If they took him off the receiving, then I have to check to see if he got hurt in practice or something. He's on the receiving side. That 12.5 receiving for Javonte Williams is not bad.
See, I don't see him there either.
He's their third down back. I mean, worst case, he's their third down back.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have a thought on the weakness of if you go in there with a passing attack, you're certainly highlighting your strength in Mims and Sutton, but you're not really attacking the weakness of the Bills' defense, which is where I was going with the rushing stuff.
Well, the counter to that is their best rushing game is a quick screen or lateral pass out to Mims. So it's not a pure passing game. Like Knicks can go off, quote unquote, and have a big game and never throw the ball past the line of scrimmage if he just gets it to Mims and lets Mims roll. It could be gotten that way via Mims, as they typically have done. This whole deep ball to Marvin Mims has only happened week 17, and then the first touchdown he had week 18 was a little screen, was the old-fashioned Tyreek Hill one-step drop, quick fire sideways, and then he just Tecmo bowled his way right through and past everybody. I don't think anybody even touched him for a 30-yard. It was a 39-yard touchdown pass for Bo Nix, but he threw the ball -1 yards.
I'll just close by saying nothing would set up a Mims bubble screen touchdown better than pounding Estime up into the middle of that soft defense.
They'd never see it coming. Fake it to Mims and hand it to Estime. The whole defense will be moving towards Mims. Got it.
Yeah. All right. Well, for Chris's sake, I hope that's exactly what happens. But let's move on to the NFC, guys. We rounded out all the AFC games. So the first NFC game on the wild card slate will be Sunday, I believe 4:30 Eastern. We have the Packers going into Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a 4.5 home favorite. The over-under here is 45.5. And the most interesting part about this game is their seasons opened up versing each other, right? So they were both in Brazil. Eagles won that game, but in that game is towards the end, Jordan Love got injured, and throughout the entire season, Love appears to have been dealing with some groin injury, which he sustained in week 1 against the Eagles. I think in I feel like it was a meaningless play, or the game might have been out of hand at that point. I don't recall exactly, but he comes into this game injured too. I think he was also playing in another meaningless game, week 18 against Chicago, where they had really nothing to play for, and I think he got hit on like his elbow, his funny bone or whatever, and they just pulled him out to be precautionary. But I think it's fair to say that he's not 100%. And obviously on Philadelphia's side, we have Jalen Hurts, who's been in concussion protocol, but he was expected to practice today, and I think he's trending towards playing. It would be really surprising if he doesn't. So before we, really break this game down, I feel like I don't even want to do count of 3 anymore. You guys are just making me go first, so I'll just give out my pick to just kick things off. I got Philly -4.5. RC, Chris, what are your guys' thoughts?
We already bet Philly at -3.5.
My best bet of the weekend is Philly.
Yeah.
And I did 2 things when the lines first came out, which, again, I'm so excited to get into the offseason and figure out a way to have a service where we just hit a button and everyone gets some kind of a notification. But I thought my 2 things were 3.5. I'll take Philadelphia. I thought that line was too low. And the total came out at 47.5. And I thought that was way too high. I got the line moves. I don't always get them, but it came down. But I just thought Philadelphia I've been to that, not this particular stadium, but Old Veterans Stadium, a 4:30 game, going into the evening. Green Bay plays in a cold environment, but it's just raw in Philadelphia. So I immediately thought under in this game, and I just. As far as the sides, so we're all on Philadelphia. Is that right?
Yep.
Andrew, you took Philadelphia. Right?
First game this weekend. Where
He's got it at
this
4.5.
whole
We got
wild
it
card-
at 3.5. So
Right. So if it lands 4, we
Yeah.
win and Andrew loses.
Yeah.
We have to make up some ground on Andrew somehow after he dominated us in the division round, the division preseason bets. But I just, one thing I thought was funny from listening to us 3 months ago, RC, you were saying Vic Fangio is not even a thing. He doesn't even exist in this world. He's, is such a dinosaur and a thing from the past. And that was the question, right? Was it that the Miami players didn't want to be coached hard? And then I think pretty early in the season, we saw that a lot of the guys in Philadelphia were happy to take the coaching from Vic Fangio, little, tougher, take on the personality of the city and just kind of be hardworking players and put together a good defense. And I think that's really dangerous. I did see yesterday, Ian Book was waived, and he was signed to the practice squad when Hurts got hurt. And then I think today I just saw when I was out a TV with no sound, and it was Hurts throwing the ball. So I don't know if there's any report. Full practice. Okay, so that was the thing. If he was limited, then it would be a little more drama. But full practice, we're good to go. I just I'm high on the Eagles this season and going into the playoffs, and I've been low on Green Bay relative to everybody else. I think they've obviously got some good things going, straightened out their defense, versus the last couple of years. But Andrew, like you were saying, it just seems like there's always something with Green Bay. They haven't they don't really have any good wins. I feel like every time they had to step up and play a good team, they didn't get there. So while it's a talented roster top to bottom, you just feel that you usually feel when something, it just doesn't seem to be firing. It's kind of like Houston. And the thing that Green Bay did last year, I think, I'm going to just double check it, is believe they covered both of their playoff games. They did. They played 2 playoff games and they covered them both. So I think about that and the likelihood that happens again. If I'm going to bet on or against that team, I'm going to go against it. It's pretty rare to cover both of your playoff games. Losing in the playoffs but still covering. So 2-0 against the spread. And I just don't like this. I don't like the spot at Philadelphia for them.
Yeah, this is terrible. And I preseason, I had the Rams coming out of the NFC. After what I've seen from Philadelphia and their defense, just looking really good under Fangio, how good Barkley's looked with them, it's hard to argue that, I like them better than Detroit coming out of here. I would change my pick from the Rams to Philly. I think this is a mismatch. This might be really lopsided. And, to the audience, this is the first match where all 3 of us are on one side. So that makes
Green
me
Bay upset alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Green Bay is going to be without Watson. I don't know, he's not particularly their number one wide receiver, but
throw the ball for that to be an impact.
Yeah, fair.
They just run the ball with Josh Jacobs every play,
which they're not going to be able to.
And that ain't going to work against the Eagles.
Exactly. So they're going to need Love to kind of turn on his heroics from the last postseason, where he went into Dallas and San Francisco and all of a sudden looked like the second coming of Aaron Rodgers. But we haven't really seen that this season. I don't like this spot at all for Green Bay. I think this is an easy Philly win. So both defenses are okay, Philly's good. Green Bay's, I would say they're solid, above average solid. Is there anything that sticks out here prop wise that you guys want to play?
I was going to throw out that when thinking about this game, just to add on to all the things that you guys have said, when I go back to the beginning of the season and I'm thinking, okay, the best teams in football to me are all in the NFC, and I could see any one of Detroit, the Rams, and Green Bay was my sleeper of that group, so to say, being the best team in the NFC. I did not have Minnesota in that class. Then, as you watch this season develop, so I started out being good with the Rams, good with the Packers, bet on both of them to win the conference to go to the Super Bowl because the odds were so high. And I'm like, I like these two teams. They could stumble their way through and win this thing. I think Detroit is better than all of them, but Rams and Green Bay right up there with them. As the season has unfolded, the Lions went on a big winning streak, and you see how good that team is, even with all their injuries. The Eagles, I did not believe in. Then we saw how good that team became, and it went on a big win streak. I did not believe in the Vikings. We saw how good that team is. They went on a nice run. Green Bay is the one team and the Rams obviously started slow and hurt, and then they turned it on. The one team of that group that I thought these are all really good teams that cannot keep up with the Joneses, that get beat by them. I think that aren't they 0-4 against Detroit and Minnesota?
Yeah.
They have not gotten better when the other teams have become dominant. I mean, the Rams went on a hell of a run. The Detroit, Philadelphia, Minnesota, you see it when they're playing. You're like, if you watch Minnesota play, over the last couple of weeks, you're like, is this the best team in football? Then you watch Detroit, and you're like, is this the best team in football? You watch the Eagles, like, is this the best team? You watch Green Bay, and you're like, what has happened to the Packers? Like, they're good, but there's something's not right with the Packers. So I don't think the Packers belong in this class with the other group. And the fact that they drew the Eagles in the first round, which is arguably the best team in the game now, I think they're going to get blown out big time.
Well, if Green Bay is going to cover, I hope they win outright, just for the Rams' sake. But I don't see that happening. But I will say there was another bet that I made with the Eagles too. Is FanDuel allows you to have they put lines on hypothetical matchups that could happen in the next round. So I already have Philadelphia -3. It was -115, little juice on it, hosting Minnesota. So if that were to play out, I think the Vikings, even if you get them with a win at the Rams, then okay, great job. But I see the Philadelphia hosting the Vikings as a potential kill spot. So
and
3
probably
points
on a
there.
short week.
Well, I mean, think about this. I mean, who's rated better? I mean, the Vikings have to be rated higher in everybody's power ranking. I don't think you could have one that has Green Bay higher, even if you like the Packers. That's a tough one. I mean, I get everybody's, they're down on the Vikings after the Lions game, but you at least would have to say those two teams at Philadelphia should be equal. I mean, the Green Bay is up to is getting 4.5. I guess you're saying the Vikings are a 1.5 better than Green Bay with that line, but I think 3 points.
3 points is perfect for that matchup. Darnold on the road in Philly, that would not end well.
Yeah, I get the sense that we're on the we're on the 55 plus side if we're taking Philly -3. How often do they win the game, and then how often do you get a 1 or 2 point victory? I think you're feeling like you're getting the best of it with Philly -3 in this in next round, and then if you do that, and obviously if the hypothetical matchup doesn't play out, one of those teams loses or they don't wind up matching up against each other, you just get refunded the money. So you just it just goes right back right away.
Then to the props, I don't like anything here.
I didn't find anything
Romeo
either.
Dobbs. I bet on Romeo Dobbs over, figuring that the Packers were going to get smoked and they were going to have to throw a bunch. And Dobbs is their supposed number one receiver. The Tucker Kraft could be something on an over, but I'm not betting anything heavy from this. Green Bay has
I don't see any clear mismatches.
I can't predict what Green Bay does from 1 week to the next besides hand it to Josh Jacobs every play.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Eagles as a unit versus Green Bay as a unit is a mismatch, but positionally it's kind of hard to say AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, or on the flip side, Reed, Dobb. It's kind of like, you're straight up gambling at that point. I don't have a read on it.
Yeah, I just don't think Green Bay's got the Detroit grit, the Eagles grit, where they're going out and they're taking on top teams and beating them. That's Green Bay's losing to them all the time. And even Green Bay, when they've kept it close against some of these big losses, they get way down and then they have a big flurry in the fourth quarter to make it look closer than it was. So, I'm sadly totally off of Green Bay. All my bets for them to win the conference at big odds is going to be a zero return.
And if we see that flurry at the end of this game, I will be disappointed because I think that is more of a regular season thing. Obviously, in the playoffs, you see sometimes teams come back. That certainly happens, but I'm not counting on it here. I actually took the under 20.5 for Green Bay's team total, and then an alternate under 17.5 plus 140. I actually really, this bet is as much about Philly's defense. So if Green Bay does come in and put up that points, whether it's early or late, I'll be on the wrong side of that. But my clear favorite is the Eagles side. So with that, I don't have much else that I like. If I like one thing that much I like to like one thing a game. So my appetite is full with the Philly side.
If Green Bay had beaten Detroit or beaten Minnesota sometime during the season, they could say, hey, we can win these games. We can take on these big teams, but they have literally gotten whacked every time they've played the top teams. They just not stood the test. And I think that innate feeling that Detroit seems to play with, like, we're going to beat everybody. We'll beat anybody and everybody, and we'll go for it on fourth down, and we're aggressive. I think the Packers have the opposite belief now that they know that they don't belong in this group. So I think Philadelphia could jump on them and Green Bay would roll right over.
The last thing I heard that I think is interesting is Minnesota a few weeks back kind of put out the blueprint for how to play the Packers. And Jordan Love is EPA per dropback this year versus zone. He's the third best quarterback in the league versus man. He's 30th. So and he's getting he's worse against the blitz than he was last year. And so when the Vikings played him, even though the Packers did rally back in that game to make it close, it's a very recent example that Fangio and the defense can pull from in terms of how to play the Packers. And then you take away Watson from that too. I think it adds even more challenge to their offense. So I would be frankly surprised, even more surprised based on that, if Green Bay was able to pull something together here.
And we know that Buffalo loves playing man, so they kind of played into the Vikings' defensive strength there. But when the Vikings got up, they probably reverted back to zone to kind of protect the lead because they were pretty much controlling that game. And it's funny too because that was their first game of the season. I think Love recently returned from an injury and they fell down to the Vikings like 30-0 in halftime. They had a huge lead, and then again, Vikings reverted back to zone, protecting a 30-point lead. Love made it close. So the moral of the story here is, I guess, can't take the heat off this guy. That when you revert to zone, he could chop you up.
Well, I think that's been Love's story lately, or really his whole career. It's even if he's inefficient, he hits big plays and puts points on the board, even if it's not at a high success rate, high completion rate.
The Packers are a run-heavy team now and about to play in a playoff where there's really tough run defenses.
Mm-hmm.
The Eagles chief among them. So it's the wrong matchup at the wrong time at the wrong place for Green Bay to get
I
a
think
legitimate upset.
just on a fantasy point basis, RC, I think that Philly's D was number one against running backs. So I mean, that's not the end all be all stat, but it does show you that they have a pretty strong run defense. So, um, okay, let's move on to the Sunday night game, Washington at Tampa Bay. Also a week one rematch. Tampa Bay is a 3-point home favorite. The over under here is the highest of the weekend, 50.5. So again, I'm not going to do this on the count of three. I'm just going to reveal my pick because I'm scarred by you guys. I'm going to go with Tampa Bay -3 here. RC, Chris, what says you guys?
I'm going to take the 3 with Washington.
When I'm looking at my list here, how well Andrew did for the division bets, I'm gonna roll with him and take Tampa Bay. And also, I did see that the Arthur DeCesar from the Superbook was on I heard an interview with him, and he said public's on Washington, sharp money's on Tampa Bay. So I'll go with Andrew and the sharp money on Tampa. But I don't have this is not a strong side on this game. That's just where I'll check my box on Tampa and kind of talk through this and see where we land.
Yeah, I think for me, I noticed that too. This has the biggest discrepancy between the percentage of tickets and money at 23%. So there's 23% more money than tickets, which is the largest like delta in this entire weekend. So I think there's a lot of sharp money coming in on Tampa Bay, which is always nice. That makes me feel more comfortable with my pick. But really here, I think the Tampa Bay secondary is starting to get a little more healthy. I saw Antoine Winfield practice today. I think that's going to help them out a little bit. Washington D is giving up a lot of they're not that great against the run, so I expect Tampa Bay to give a nice dosage of Bucky Irving. But the matchup that I'm most excited about, being a Falcons fan, seeing this NFC South rivalry between Tampa Bay and New Orleans, was when Marshawn Lattimore was on the Saints. Him and Mike Evans would fight all the time. Lattimore is now with the Commanders, so I'm kind of excited to see how that matchup goes between the two. But really here we have a rookie quarterback making his first NFL playoff start. I think that he's going to, get a little shell-shocked on the road. It is a different atmosphere. Baker's been here, been there, done that. He's taken Cleveland to the playoffs and won a playoff game. He's taking Tampa to the playoffs and won a playoff game. So this is nothing new for him. I fully expect Tampa, even though I don't really favor either coaching side. I'll give the slight edge to Washington with Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury. I like them better than Todd Bowles, but I'm going to go with the more experienced quarterback in this one.
To defend the Commanders, one of the reasons I'm siding with the Commanders is I don't have a lot of faith in the Buccaneers. I think the worst defensive, if you look at all of these teams and you look at their defenses and you go, okay, where is there a big weakness at that other teams could exploit? And a lot of it is these defenses are all good. They're fairly balanced. There's two defenses that are tipped in a direction where one of the directions you can expose them and beat them. And probably the worst is Tampa Bay's pass defense, as witnessed by Kirk Cousins having career games against them this year when Kirk Cousins could barely complete a pass against anybody else. He was tearing apart Tampa Bay. But just to go through Tampa Bay's season in the last 10 or so games, 4-game losing streak that they fell to 4-6 on. Then they have a bye. Then I remember at that point saying, regardless of what you think about Tampa Bay, they have such an easy schedule coming up. Get their defense in advance because you can really use them for the rest of the season. So they're 4-6. They lost 4 games in a row. They come off a bye. They beat the Giants. Who cares? They should have lost to Carolina. They won in overtime. They beat the Raiders, not that impressively, but they beat them. Who cares? They did beat the Chargers. I mean, they whacked the Chargers. That's a good quality win for them. Then they turned around the very next week and lost to the Cooper Rush Dallas Cowboys on, I think it was Sunday Night Football. They couldn't handle the Dallas downfall. Then they beat Carolina when Carolina had half their team out on the injury list. They crushed them pretty good. Then you go to week 18 and you're like, oh, well, they're going to certainly blow out Spencer Rattler and the Saints because all they need to do is win, and it doesn't matter what Atlanta does or anything. Like, Tampa Bay can just sew up this division by going out and rocking the Saints. They damn well came close to losing that game. They could not, for about 3/4 of that game, they couldn't not hang with the Saints, but they couldn't get over on them. They were flustered against the New Orleans Saints. Their 7-game run at the end of the season is beating a lot of bad teams and a lot of bad quarterbacks, but then also struggling against some of them as well, but getting the win. I don't know that this Tampa Bay team is as good as everybody thinks, but I do think that the Commanders are more of a legit team. Even though they have a rookie quarterback, I think there's a more legit team here, and them playing Philadelphia so tough and getting that comeback win, I think is a big marker for them going forward, that they're going to go into this game. I think they should almost, in their minds, be the favorite in this game. I just like the way that Washington is playing to end the season. 5-game win streak, beat Philly, beat Atlanta in an important game that Atlanta needed. Didn't play great against Dallas, but Jaden Daniels was also out for half of that game. I like the way the Commanders are closing. I don't love the way that the Buccaneers are closing. So that's why I'm going with Washington. And Tampa Bay's so weak in the secondary that I think it's going to be Washington air raiding on the Bucs.
I don't find that Philadelphia come from behind win as impressive as you might, RC, just for the fact that, Hurts got concussed early in that game and left. I think Philly jumped on him when Hurts was in that game. They were, they were clearly in control. I look at the Commanders' schedule and I really just don't see a signature win. Fine, you can point to the Falcons. Sunday Night Football was a big spot for a rookie quarterback, but the Falcons are also starting a rookie quarterback, making his first road start in primetime too. So they were supposed to win that game. Atlanta should not have been in there. And as a pissed off Falcons fan, we should have definitely won that game. So they were very close to losing that as well. But I do recognize that Jaden is phenomenal. Tampa Bay secondary has not played anywhere near to like competitive, anywhere near what they need to be to, really make a push in the playoffs. But I think against the rookie QB and the fact that they also are really good against the run, so I don't think that Washington's going to be able to get their run game going against these guys. It's going to be tough to for Jaden to come in here. I think it's a really tough spot for a rookie quarterback, even though there's definitely some hope with the Tampa Bay secondary looking as bad as they do. It's just tough to back a rookie QB here for me personally.
And if the run game is Jaden Daniels running the ball, that could change the whole complexion.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if Tampa was going to get some guys back, but yeah, it's a terrible defense because they've been injured, and I had all those quarterbacks that you listed, RC. That was definitely a note. That's why small spread, and I was picking it with not a lot of confidence. But what tipped me to the Tampa Bay side was something Andrew hit on, and that is that the Washington defense has not been good against the run, and Tampa Bay's rush since they got Bucky going, 150 yards in 6 of the 7 games. So if you're talking about, Baker and Daniels, kind of look at go back to the Sunday night Vikings-Lions game, the takeaway from that game was, we knew Darnold would turn into a pumpkin at some point, and Jared Goff, on to the first round bye, but those guys both played equally bad in my opinion. Goff didn't have a good game at all. What he had was a running game. It's just hugely important in these games. So that was when you talk about a 3-point spread, and I got to pick a side, not a bet, it's just a pick. It was give me the team that has shown that they can run. And I was interested to hear this because I didn't know they've only beaten 2 teams with that wound up with a winning record. Cincinnati in week 3, and then the game that Andrew just mentioned, Philadelphia, that Hurts went out of. So I mean, you could beat the guys on your schedule, but 2 of their 12 wins, or I guess you could say 10 of their 12 wins were against sub 500 teams. But then also you think, is Tampa Bay really that good of a team in the league? They might be in that class too. So it wouldn't, obviously, I don't think anyone would be shocked by either one of these teams winning based on the spread being small. But home team with the advantage running the ball. I mean, I think it'd be more fun to see probably Washington go on because Jaden Daniels has had a great year. They had the magical Hail Mary win against the Bears. They've had some cool moments, the Commanders. So to get a playoff win would be awesome. But I just went with Tampa because, as I said, the home field and rushing and some playoff experience, even with the injured guys. If you get Winfield back, it's a defense that's played in the playoffs recently.
Any props that we like here? I guess the one that sticks out, Tampa Bay has been obsessed with running with Bucky, towards the, they've been trying to force Bucky in from early part in the season, but now it's completely Bucky.
Yeah, he's fully in.
So do we like anything Bucky related here, or do we want Washington receivers against the Tampa Bay secondary? Like Olamide Zaccheaus, who's been going off for them. That's a low-key name.
I think Washington has to throw heavy to win this game. If they're going to win this game, they have to throw. And if they're losing, they're going to have to throw. So I'm taking the Jaden Daniels pass yards over, and I'm taking Zaccheaus to continue on with where he's been going. I think the prop's only 36 yards or something.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that Tampa Bay, if they're going to do one thing, they're probably going to try to concentrate to take Terry out of the game, which, Atlanta was able to do, but they have AJ Terrell. I don't know that Tampa Bay has a corner of his caliber, but if they double up on him, maybe they can pull him out of the game and let Zaccheaus go crazy, let Ertz go crazy again. But I'm not sure how Tampa Bay does against.
It'll be Ertz. Yeah, it'll be Ertz and Zaccheaus. I've debated playing. I may have even done just a little amount on Ertz because that's Tampa Bay's probably the worst against the tight end remaining in the playoffs, or that are playing this weekend.
Okay. Chris, anything you like here player prop wise before we move to the last game?
No, I see the case for Zaccheaus and Ertz, and they're both priced about the same. You're right in that 38. I don't think you're getting any bargain with either one of those guys. But I guess I should say I didn't think you were, but based on RC's comment that Tampa Bay is the worst left in the playoffs against the tight end, then Ertz at 38.5, that might not be bad. And obviously Zaccheaus, you're going to be somewhat suppressed in your numbers that you're assigning to him because he's only come on recently and really had that surge. So I think that 37.5, 38.5 for those two is interesting, but it doesn't really, there's nothing really in this game prop wise that gets me as excited as some of the other things we've talked about. And I guess that the other thing to those guys and their props is, we've kind of hit mostly overs, and I think all the games in the wild card round have been, their initial move has been to bet a bet on the under, and I kind of sort of think about that in the playoffs, and the games that's expected to be the most high scoring is coming up next with the Vikings and Rams. This one, I think I could see it starting slow and getting going. I'm sorry, this was 50.5, so this is even higher. So, if you're talking about over props, this is the game to do it. Which, even though I wasn't as excited about it, it probably pulled the trigger. RC, did those numbers go up, or are we getting a bad number on both Ertz and Zacchaeus?
Let me see what the latest is.
Yeah, I didn't know what it opened at.
It's around 36, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so 37.5 was Zacchaeus, 38.5 was Ertz. I just wanted to get a sense. Has this thing run up 3 yards from where it opened? And
I think it's up a yard, maybe 2 with Ertz. But let me just note, Zacchaeus kind of got discovered / came into his own 3 weeks ago against the Eagles. 5 catches, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns against that top defense. The following week, he just rocked the Falcons, 8 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown. Last week, 2 catches for 51 yards, but that was with Daniels. I think then when Daniels went out, then Zacchaeus went down. So he's hit 50 plus yards 3 games in a row. It's not a 1 week, 2 week phenomena. He's had a couple of spike games throughout the season, but they really settled in on him 3 weeks ago, and now I see they're going to him with a purpose now, where before he was just randomly in the game, and it might be De'Ami Brown, and it might be Noah Brown, and it might be Luke McCaffrey, and it might be this, and it might be that, and now seems like they've settled on Zacchaeus as teams try to take away McLaurin, which they have kind of lately. So I think the Zacchaeus over on the baseline yardage is a pretty hot play. Ertz is cute, but Zacchaeus is more maybe my second favorite bet, him and Likely after Mims this week.
I'm curious about the receptions too, because Zacchaeus is at 3.5, and it's being juiced to the under. At least on FanDuel it is.
I thought he was over on DraftKings. Let me look. He's 3.5 minus 110 on DraftKings.
Okay, on FanDuel his under is minus 128, and I'm asking that because I think this is
about the under.
Zacchaeus is juiced to 128, so his over is minus 102, and I think the idea there I was just kind of getting at is, which would be a better, if we were going to play an alternate for a higher payout, would that be something you would be thinking about, receptions or yards?
I like the yards. I'm good with the receptions as well, but I think Tampa Bay is going to give up a lot of passing yards. So Zacchaeus will probably get the second most passing yards on the day from among the Washington receivers. So I'm not against the 3.5 catches.
Okay. I think that's a good segue into our last game of the wild card weekend. Monday Night Football, Minnesota Vikings coming into Los Angeles. Hopefully they're coming into Los Angeles because there are crazy fires going around in SoCal. There's a chance that this game might be played in Arizona. I think that's the alternate spot if the fires don't get better. And I don't trust I'm a SoCal resident. I don't trust the California people to come figure this out. So I think there's a pretty good chance this gets played in Arizona. But, the Rams are getting knocked off their routine. A lot, their practice facilities are in the midst of that, of all that commotion and everything. So I think that, they're dealing with a lot of stuff out of the ordinary. That probably doesn't bode well for them. But before we, really break this game down, Rams are a 1-point home underdog. The over-under here is 47.5, which is the second highest total on the wild card slate. So let's go ahead, make our picks. I'll give out mine first. I like the Rams to win this. I like them to cover this spread. What I saw, I don't think we saw the best version of the Vikings on Sunday night against Detroit. Sam Darnold turned into a pumpkin and kind of looked like the QB that we all thought he would look like in the beginning of the season. While I think the Rams win this, I think that the Vikings also play a lot more competitively here. They're not going to go down without a fight. I don't expect this to be a blowout, but the Rams D is just, they're really coming along. Their offense is high powered, and, they were able to rest their starters in week 18. And that team, with Kupp and Stafford, they're on the older side. They kind of needed that. Whereas the Vikings, they were in a dogfight with Detroit and, they got kicked in the behind. So I'm curious where you guys are going to land with this. RC, Chris, who are you backing against the spread?
I'll give it up to the Vikings fan.
A buddy of mine sent me a text early this week and said, "Who are you going to be cheering for Monday night?" And I was like, "Come on, you have to ask me that. Of course I'm going to be cheering for the Rams." I got too much futures. And so I guess now that we've made it to the Vikings Rams, I think it's really interesting to think about. So I have real reasons to, I don't have a strong opinion on either side of this game in terms of like, that's my side, but there's good reasons I think to think about each team. I thought I had a unique take on the Vikings game against the Lions. And I thought it was a take that was rooted in being a bitter Viking fan after that result. As I say, I wasn't betting the game. I just kind of wanted to watch it as a fan and enjoy it. I watched it as a fan. I did not enjoy it. But it really felt to me like this was, even from the announcing to the officiating to the everything, it felt like a coronation for the Lions. And Gil Alexander on VSiN said, that seemed like some NBA style home cooking. And I thought, okay, well, that's at least somebody else seeing what I saw with the missed. And Sam Darnold, if there was a prop bet for a face mask being missed, if Darnold's going to get his face mask ripped off and they're not going to call it, I would bet over a half a face mask penalty being missed on Darnold, because it was missed in the Lions game. The last time they played at the Rams, Darnold got his face mask tugged in the end zone and it wasn't called. Everything from Jared Goff with the most textbook intentional grounding you've ever seen in the end zone and taken away. No, please keep the ball and don't give the other team any points. So it was a bad game for the Vikings, but I'll say all this to say missed field goals, with all that stuff. This was not a blowout. I heard someone say the Vikings got boat raced. They did not get boat raced. The game was close at the end of the third quarter. It really became there was 2 touchdowns at the end that put some distance in the scoring. And I think it's important to think about how that game's being perceived, because now it in a way I think now the Vikings might be a little bit undervalued for how much they're getting kicked for that performance. What I will say critical about the Vikings and awesome about the Lions is things are going to happen in a game, right? Dan Campbell's thing is, yeah, some things are going to go our way. Some things are going to go against us. We keep playing. We win at the end. Great message to the team, and I looked at the Vikings during that game. Jefferson was complaining about being held because he was being held, but he also looked like he wanted to start crying. So that didn't make me happy. It wasn't going their way, and they didn't handle it well at all. And they've been to the playoffs and lost. They lost to the Giants 2 years ago. So it's not like they haven't been in big games. And so I don't think the Vikings have figured it out. Eventually you get to so this game was not like every other game in the year. The Lions took a approach to send everybody and hold all the receivers. RC, I don't know if you watched the game back, but every time they showed a replay between the Lions guy and there wasn't very much space, there was an outstretched Viking jersey. They were physical, and kind of.
That was just the wind in the stadium. That wasn't.
It was blowing their jerseys. I said the equipment manager's going to have to get a really tight mask for Sam Darnold and new jerseys that fit the Vikings this coming week. So
Chris, I think where Justin Jefferson really really started to like get off his game was one of the goal line stands. I think Darnold tried to give him a fade like three passes in a row,
And he
and
was
like
wide open on one
he
of
was
them.
burning Amik. Yeah, and Darnold just
Well,
couldn't hit him, and he kind of
one
after
of them,
that point he kind of lost it.
one of them, Darnold threw it. The one where Jefferson cut in and back out, he threw it right to Amik, and Jefferson had to swat it away. But the one you're talking about is when he put the move on and faded to the corner. Now, listen, they were getting to him, and Darnold was high from the beginning with his throws, and that fade was the one. That was the one. He was open, like he had the time. But I think Collinsworth did a good job of saying they had already sped up Darnold's internal clock there. So they rattled him. They did a good job. But the bottom line is my concern when I think about things going forward is what concerned me about the Vikings is they did not handle the situation well. And they don't have a lot of time to hit the reset button. They've got a little time now to get ready for a new team. I didn't like two things that Flores said. One, he said, I'm open to any coaching opportunities, which you should be, but it's kind of it is the time and place for them, but it's not the time and place that I want to hear. And the other thing is they said, well, the Rams, if you remember the first game these two teams played, it was a Thursday night football game, and Nakua was kind of a surprise activation shortly before kickoff. And Flores, I was only reading the headline, so I might be missing some context here, but he was like, well, they surprised us with the Puka Nakua thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that can even be a thing, but I'm not sure you need to be making excuses as you go into this game. You're going to get another chance. So there's just a couple things I'm seeing with the Vikings that seem very Vikings. And I mean very Vikings. I mean very we're going to lose and complain instead of, suck it up and play well. So I think that that's where I come on them. And you know where I stand on the Rams. I feel like they are, the offense struggled to end the season. The defense is really coming on. So they desperately needed this week off because the offensive line still wasn't completely healthy. I assume Kupp is hurt because he hasn't been playing well the last few weeks. So whatever is ailing him that's not being reported, he had a week to correct it. So I guess the last thing that is on my mind is it was very public that Dan Campbell, when he was shaking hands with O'Connell at the end of the game, said, see you in 2 weeks. Again, it's just like the Houston situation. I feel like the Rams are going to see that, and that's something that motivates these guys, professional athletes and teams. They won't say a word about it, and then after the game, they'll say, maybe you're going to see us now in 2 weeks. And so I think that it's a springboard potentially if the Rams get this for the next game, but definitely a motivation to hear a comment like that, even though I'm not sure Dan Campbell meant it like that. He probably meant it respectfully to O'Connell, like, hey, listen, you guys are good. And, but I could see it also coming across as a slight to the Rams, right?
What I would give for a Detroit Rams rematch, that would be freaking incredible. We need that. I hope that happens. And for that to happen, Chris, our picks pretty much have to go fully through where Philly needs to win, Tampa needs to win, and Rams win. So in mine and Chris's world, RC, we get that Detroit Rams rematch, which would be awesome.
I don't think Minnesota could beat Detroit if they played again. I mean, they could. I mean, I just don't think they will. But I think the one team that can stop the Lions in this, probably more than Philadelphia, is the Rams. So that's why I'm hoping we get that matchup, because that might be the launch point for the Rams to be the shock team going forward to take down the Lions.
More, but I would say pretty equally. Philly, I know could do it. Rams, I know could do it. The rest of them, Detroit probably has the edge on. RC, before you also provide your take on where you're going with this, I don't know if you already came out and picked Rams or Mini, but one thing I want to say about Chris, I started off the segment by saying that Minnesota got kind of boat raced in this game. They, score wise they did, but to Chris's point, the game was close, going in at least into halftime. I mean, the Vikings had, I think, 3 possessions from the 5-yard line, and they came away with 3 points. There was one holding call that wasn't called when Goff was in the end zone that could have been a safety for 2 points. And also, not Anzalone, sorry, but Van Ginkel dropped the pick six. Nothing went the Vikings' way. So this game could have looked a lot differently. And I think that for us, I know all of us are pretty big Rams backers. We're kind of upset that Mini didn't look as strong because we could have probably got a better Rams number here if Mini put up a fight against Detroit. Maybe this line would have been closer to like 2.5 and 3, but I don't care. I think Rams win this game regardless. So RC, take it away.
I'm with the Rams. I wouldn't bet it, but I'm picking them. When I look at it, the two things that jump out for me, and I would not be surprised if Minnesota won this game at all, but the two things that kind of jump out to me is Tampa Bay's pass defense is the worst of all of the groups in the playoffs. Minnesota can give them a run for their money in pass defense. It's a weakness, and they're really good against the run, but they can be really bad against the pass. And you're going to put Matt Stafford. It's not like they're going to get a rookie trying to throw against them. They're going to get hot, playoff experienced Matt Stafford with his wide receiver group and his offensive line intact. I like that as a lean towards the Rams, but then it's just looking up and down the team. If you judge the big position groups of who's better, and you go who's got the better quarterback, you would have to take Stafford. For as well as Darnold has played this year, you would take Stafford at this moment. Who's got the better offensive line when Minnesota lost Darisaw and the Rams got all their offensive linemen back? Tilt to the Rams. And then who's got the better defense? The Rams have had the better defense the last couple of months. That defense has really come on. So everywhere up and down the line, the Rams have an edge to me. Vikings have a better coach, but the Rams have a lot of everything else. And I think if the Rams try to play the game like the Lions did, if they saw, oh crap, let's just attack Sam Darnold, I think Rams have more horses to do that with than the Lions did. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin O'Connell knows that's coming and comes up with a plan and just completely thwarts it and they end up beating the Rams by 30 points. Would not shock me either. So I would never bet this, but I'm going to be with the Rams from what I've seen of late. But it is that 1 point spread. It is close.
I'll say I did bet the Rams this week, but it's not this game. It's another one of the hypothetical matchups that could happen next week. And we've talked about it already. Andrew mentioned it. It's the Rams. If they go to Detroit, the look ahead line on FanDuel is the Rams plus 6.5. And I thought about waiting and saying, well, might it hit 7? It might, but I think if the Rams win this game, I don't expect them to get a huge amount of credit because I think the Rams and Vikings are two teams that aren't very popular in terms of like NFC
They'll say
championship
Sam
situation.
Darnold finally fell back to earth. That's why they won.
Yeah, and I just think you might see it hit 7, and if it does, I'll take it again. But I wanted to lock in the 6.5 because remember these two teams have played. They played in the playoffs last year, and it was a 1-point game, and they played earlier this year. And was that a field goal game?
And the Lions won it in overtime, and that's when the Rams were missing half their team at that point.
So it's definitely.
I can't believe the Rams should have won that game.
So I think the Rams going to Detroit, even if you want to give Detroit a lot of respect, which they deserve, the line should be 3.5, 4.
What's the look ahead line for Minnesota? Detroit.
Stafford's not losing 3 in a row in Detroit. I can't see that happening. But yeah, I'm curious for that look ahead line too for Mini.
Is it probably 5 or 6?
No, you know what's funny? I did look at that, and so it kind of was my a version of the Viking takeaway rant that I did when I was walking the dog. The final piece of the puzzle there is the hypothetical line if they do play, which a bettable line right now, because that game that they played in week 18 was Vikings plus 2.5 is where it closed. It was bouncing between 3.5 and 2.5, 2.5 with juice. I'm sorry, not 3.5, 2.5, 3. The hypothetical line for a playoff game in the divisional round is Vikings plus 3.5. So just to see that's how much I feel like it's just been a lot of negative. It was everyone just waiting for the Vikings to have one bad game to dismiss them. And listen, I was the one saying all season, I think that's why Kevin O'Connell is such a great coach and coach of the year candidate, is the Vikings talent wise they're not there. They're not ready. They've got some good players for sure. Flores has done good things with with the defense, but you don't look at the Vikings and say, and a lot of that is what you said, RC. Christian Darrisaw is one of the best tackles in the league, and he's gone. And
it's an
enormous thing for their offensive line.
When the Rams lost their top offensive, they couldn't even win a game earlier in the season. Minnesota loses Darrisaw, and they just kept winning.
Yeah. So they've done a tremendous job, but it's you can see that but I do think it's very interesting and almost funny that when you look at the Vikings season on paper, they've won all the games except in the middle of the season they lost to Detroit, and then they went to the Rams and lost, and now they lost to Detroit and they're going to the Rams again. If the Vikings lose this game, that's the way it's going to look the 2024-2025 season for the Vikings. They beat everybody except Detroit Rams, and then Detroit Rams happened again.
I kind of like either team that wins this game to go beat Detroit.
Well, I like either team.
Minnesota's motivation is going to be through the roof, and the public's going to see that 3.5 and bet it to 4.5, 5, because they're going to remember Week 18 as a blowout that it wasn't.
Well, that's why I didn't bet the Vikings plus 3.5 in a hypothetical future, because I don't think it's going to be 3.5. I think as soon as that matchup is set, you're right. It's going to find its way to 4.5. I bet. So yeah. So here's the. Is there any others you're wondering about? I mean, I think that I bet the two that caught my attention, which is Rams plus 6.5 at the Lions, and okay, you know what? The Vikings Eagles are up to 3.5.
What's Denver, Kansas City?
They don't have it. Can they play Kansas City?
That would be a very interesting matchup.
Well, I would suspect today they would probably have the point spread near 10. If they're 9.5, 8.5, started 9.5. If they're 8.5, 9.5 to Buffalo, it's going to be 10.
They got to be 10.
The Chiefs.
Yeah, they only have 2 listed. They have if the Chargers are at the Chiefs next round, the Chiefs are favored by 5.5. If it's Houston at the Chiefs, it's 7.5.
Huh. Yeah, man, I would take that Chiefs one all day long.
Against Houston?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're not listing. But it's interesting.
If Denver gets there, let's say that they did have a line, it'd probably be right around 10. But if Denver actually beat Buffalo, it would probably come down to 9 or so, because everybody will be shocked that they beat Buffalo, and then they'll look and see that Denver played Kansas City really tough. Denver should be 2-0. Denver should have beat Kansas City, but obviously both times. The Wentz time is a given, but they should have won. They had that game against Kansas City.
Well, it's part of when I think about this week. I know that this is a divisional matchup, and they played them well even when they weren't good. But when you think about a wild card team getting an upset, I mean, they're a team that played with Kansas City. So when they look at each other and they're maybe they're one of the youngest teams in the league, right? So maybe they're too young to even know they shouldn't beat Buffalo, and they played with Kansas City twice. So, I'm interested to see that game, what we get out of Denver.
All right, I got to go check what's Denver to win the Super Bowl. Now you got me hyped.
Well, before we get
Denver,
into those futures, guys, can we get into props for this game as well before we stray away into futures and hypotheticals? You guys were talking about Minnesota, their secondary not being great. So is this the place we want to fire up Kupp, Nakua? And likewise, Jefferson coming off a really bad game. Is this a bounce back spot for him?
I've got yes to Puka, yes to Justin Jefferson if I had to bet it, but I usually am not looking at the stars to try to figure out if they're going to be stars that week. I'm usually looking down in the weeds for easy layup type situations or things that are being missed, players that are so undervalued. I think there's two scenarios, low level props here that have my interest that I've already bet. One is that I think the Rams are going to have to throw on Minnesota. I know Detroit ran the ball pretty well against Minnesota last week, but Minnesota's got a really good run defense. So the Rams are either going to get behind and throw, or they're going to throw because that's what they tend to do. Tutu Atwell has a very low yardage prop, and he's kind of becoming their Stafford's third favorite wide receiver. The tight ends don't excite Stafford. Cooper Kupp has disappeared, has gone in the witness protection program. We might see, especially if the Rams get down, that Tutu Atwell crushes that like 9.5 or 10.5 yard prop in the first quarter on one throw. And Atwell, if you look at what he's done this year, he kind of was disappeared early and midway through the season, and then they started getting him in the games. He makes some big catches. I think didn't he have the big catch against the Vikings to put maybe it was against Buffalo, big fourth down catch or something. And since then, we've seen more and more Atwell getting into games. So I think Atwell can get that in one catch by the first half. And then and I'm interested to see if Chris nods his head in agreement or thinks that this is off track. When I watch Minnesota on offense, when Cam Akers is in the game, they look pretty darn good running the ball with Cam Akers. Not that Aaron Jones is terrible, but it's like there's a different speed going on. There's a different vibe going on when Cam Akers gets into the game. I'm not suggesting that they're going to switch and have a whole Cam Akers event, but I see O'Connell going to him more and more because Aaron Jones, is hurt every game. It seems he's going back to the locker room and then coming back into the game. But Akers possibly getting more touches against the Rams' defensive weakness is defending the run. And Aaron Jones is not 100%. Cam Akers looks good. He's getting more touches. And it's the Cam Akers who was dismissed by Sean McVay on top of everything else. So if Cam Akers gets in the game, he's going to give it all he's got. But he's looked good outside of that conjecture. I think Akers can take down that 23-yard, 24-yard rushing prop, especially if Minnesota gets control of this game and just decides to run it all over the Rams. It's not going to be 27 carries for Aaron Jones and 2 for Akers.
I agree with you, RC. When Akers is in the game, that I don't know what's up with Aaron Jones. Different. Yeah, they just seem like the offense just flows better. Chris, were there any props you wanted to get into on this before we move on from the game?
Well, I'm trying to think about the Rams defense because lately what's happened is, and really lately, I mean the last couple of games, but he's been a player for them all year. When Hawkinson was out, the there's some backup tight ends that they have, but the guy that was running in the Hawkinson
You going
role,
for the Josh Oliver catch?
no, it's not,
Or the
because you have Oliver who's decent. There's tight ends, but when Hawkinson was out, it was Jalen Naylor who KOC said was running the Hawkinson routes, and so he was scoring a bunch. But in the last couple of weeks, Naylor has showed up, and he will show up and get a completion, and usually a decently long one. And I only see his receiving yards on FanDuel. It's 18.5. I'm looking over at somewhere else here at Offshore that I see him at 17.5, and kind of like Atwell, similar situation where you can get it in one reception. I think he's definitely getting targets in the last few weeks. So he's someone that it's not like you're hoping for a prayer that he gets a look. And I think the Rams.
Jordan Addison was so good last week.
Well, that's the thing too, right? I guess Naylor was able to break
one catch for no yards on 6 targets. Naylor was the one that came up bigger than Addison did.
I mean, he would have to be 8'4" to catch some of those targets that Darnold was throwing. So I don't know what is considered a target, but I think that Addison is not in the game that went the way last week went. I wouldn't expect Jordan Addison to be, to be breaking the full court press that the Lions were putting on the on the Vikings there. So yeah, Naylor got open for a couple. It's been a couple weeks and he's definitely a guy that he'll get a few targets. I mean, if you get a catch or two, you're highly likely with Jalen Naylor to be over 17 yards. He's not a guy that
reliable.
He doesn't catch the ball at the line of scrimmage. He's out down the field catching balls. And I'm not sure about the running back situation. I think you're right. So I know they want. So there's I think there was an IV situation with Aaron Jones last week. They were saying when Dr. Chow's podcast was saying that when he came out of the locker room late, he had like the tape where he was getting an IV, but he's still got the calf thing isn't completely healed either. So, and does that heal in a week? No, I think their desire is to have it be all Aaron Jones all the time, but he's not healthy. So that's where I would say another angle for Akers is, he's going to get in the game. Even if Aaron Jones is having a great game, Akers will, spell him, but because he's hurt. But if he wasn't hurt, I think their desire is to not have it be a split. They want it to be Aaron Jones. It just can't be.
In the last 10 games for Akers, all of games with Minnesota, his carry counts are all over the place. 1 and 5 and 4 and 6 and 10, and he's got all these touch counts all over the place, but usually single digits. He has a 10-yard carry in every one of those games but one. So, and he don't take that many carries. So when he gets in, he's ripping off some nice yardage. It would only take him a couple carries potentially. Last week he had a 58-yarder.
Yeah, that was a good run
on Detroit. So I'm just thinking between Aaron Jones always seems to be missing plays, needing plays off.
Uh-huh.
Akers has an axe to grind for sure with the Rams. I just got a funny feeling we're going to see O'Connell especially probably give Akers a couple carries earlier than maybe planned just to see if he catches an angry lightning in a bottle.
I certainly think that's possible, that revenge game factor, and the fact that O'Connell does seem to really like playing Akers too. So we'll see where that goes. So that was the last game on the slate. I rudely interrupted Chris when he was looking at some other alternative lines. Are there any futures we want to talk about, or any other alternative lines we want to give out to the audience, or are we getting close to wrapping here?
He's looking to find a way to hedge his Bengals losses. Trying to find a new Super Bowl team.
Well, it's got to be it's got to be the Rams, I guess.
I know.
But they not Super Bowl. I just need the Rams to win the NFC.
I know. I
that's
just
all.
need the Rams or the Packers to somehow win it.
Well, the Rams NFC bets were at lower odds, but when we were betting when they were 1-4, enthusiastically betting the Rams, that NFC bets that took place then are 80-1 to win the conference.
I did bet the Eagles when they started rolling, and I saw how good that defense had become. I bet on the Eagles to win the conference and win the Super Bowl before the odds really got out there. So I have some money spread around on the NFC teams, the non-Lions, to get to the Super Bowl, and then for the Eagles to win it. I don't think I bet the Rams to win it.
I'm not sure that I have either.
I think I was just hoping that they could just get there. There was good money in just getting there.
Oh, I'll be thrilled if they get there. I won't need any more bets after that if I get those 80-1 shots. So, yeah, this is good. I think we have a solid bet on every game this weekend. So that gives what more can you ask for than that? I'll recap it beforehand and let everybody know what the I have to go back and think about what our absolute best bet is for each game, because we had a couple where we threw out some multiple ideas. But that's solid.
It seemed like the strongest one we had as a group was probably Philly.
All Eagles.
Yeah, going all Eagles. We were all Rams too, but I felt like we were stronger with Philly in our sentiment.
Yeah, I'm not going to be betting the Rams because I have so much already tied up with them already. And I kind of wonder. I don't even think it's worth at this point hedging. If the Rams win this game and get to the next round, then I would think about how to potentially. But then they're going to be underdogs in 2 games in a row, so it makes it challenging. But
They paid enough off just by winning the division and getting to the playoffs and getting over 8.5 wins.
That's what I think about. Anybody that was riding along with us for that, we're already a house money with the Rams and the futures for them to win the NFC. So for that, I think let it ride and see where it goes. So yeah, definitely Philly was the consensus side. I don't think we had any strong sides or totals. It was all props from each game. So tomorrow I'll put a list together so I can do the recap, but also I'll shoot it out to you guys just so you can see what, in case you weren't keeping score.
Yeah, that sounds good. And we tried to keep this at 15 minutes per game to get to closer to an hour and a half. And of course, we go over. We're at 2.5 hours here. So a nice long
I had the over on 2 hours.
There you go. That's the one
minus
over under with. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap for us. We'll be back next week with the divisional round bets. Only 4 games there, so maybe we can get under 2 hours in that one, but I wouldn't really hold my breath. So see you all next week, and thank you all for listening.